Okay, so trying this again. Sorry, last time my throat started really burning and spasming. Hopefully this works out a little bit better. So and sorry, I do have a throat drop or a cough drop in my mouth here. But as I was sharing last time, I had a received an email about 11 or 12 years ago from a friend, and it was just sort of a joke, like, "What are you going on? What are you going dressed as on Halloween?" And my response was sarcastic, and I was being sort of I guess, a jerk. And I said, "Well, I thought of going as a soldier in World War II era France, but I couldn't find a white flag anywhere in the States, anywhere in the United States." And what I implied by that was the fact that because the government at the time in France let the Nazis in. I mean, there was really no fighting. It was like, no bombs on us. We just, why defend when you can collaborate? There are these sort of jokes that go along with it, but it's a serious matter. And it should be noted that while the government turned on their own people, while the government betrayed their own people, the French people, the resistance, they never stopped fighting. They never ever gave up. And I'm going to be reading some notes, so forgive me. I did a PowerPoint some years ago because I actually felt bad. I thought about it, and I have ancestors who were French also. And to denigrate an entire population like that, I felt horrible because the resistance paid a heavy, heavy price for the war. So I wanted to talk to you today about the Maquis du Vercors. I call them the Spartans of the French resistance, and with good reason. So the Maquis, it's actually a French word. It means like bush or thicket. But it's a name that was given to the rural guerrilla bands of the French resistance. This is during World War II. Now, this is a group of people who fled to the mountains, and this was in the Vercors Plateau, like in the French Prealp, or the Prealps is what they called it, before you get to the Alps, a mountain range. And they fled to the mountains to avoid conscription in the STO. And the STO in Vichy, France, what that was, is they would provide forced labor for the occupying German forces. They initially fought for their right to remain free, and later they actually became active resistance groups. So at first they were fleeing conscription. They didn't want to be part of the forced labor force or forced labor corps for the Germans, for the Nazis. Now, the members of the Maquis were known as the Maquisards. And so I'll put up some pictures another time so you can see the actual range. It's a massive mountain range and plateau between that range and the French Prealps. And it's called the Vercors. Now, here's how it went. June of 1940, France signs an armistice and they get cut in two. There's an occupied zone in the northwest and a free zone in the central and southeast of France. Now, the Vercors became a massive refuge for many of the French and foreign persecuted and exiled. And again, sorry, I've got a cough drop in here, so it's mumbling my words a little bit. So that's in June of 1940. December of 42, the first Maquis of Vercors, they're formed on the farm of Ambel. And then in early 1943, architect Pierre Dalloz, he planned to transform the Vercors into a landing base for the Allied forces. And that was to cut off the retreating German forces. And they named this plan Montagnards, or the Mountaineers Plan. And again, I am reading some notes and filling in. So just, in case my eyes wander a bit. Now, June of 1944, thousands of people rallied to the Vercors to assist the Allied D-Day invasion by slowing down the German forces en route to Normandy. Now, this isn't known by, it's probably known by a lot of people, but it's not really shared in schools or public knowledge that I knew of. I had to dig this out. But this group helped slow the German advance going into Normandy. And that's when you have the D-Day invasion, that was the largest amphibious invasion in history. And so our troops landed at Normandy, but they assisted the troops, the Maquis de Vercors, by slowing the Germans down. So they had a huge part in that. Now, June 5th, 1944. There was a speech on the BBC, and Charles de Gaulle declared his famous line. He says, "The chamois of the Alps leaps forth." A chamois is we call it like something we dry a car off with, but a chamois is sort of like a mix between, not an elk, but sort of like an antelope and goat mix. And they're native to France, and they're in the French Alps there. So Charles de Gaulle says this line, which is code for, plan Montagnard, the Mountaineers Plan, to begin. And so this signals thousands of the Maquisards to begin their plan. Now, what had happened was the Maquisards were then surrounded by an estimated 10,000 troops led by General Karl Flamm of the Germans. So the Maquisards nevertheless hoist the French tricolor, their flag, and proclaim the Free Republic of Vercors. And now there was Nazi propaganda posters that were put all over that asked the questions, are they liberators or are they an army of crime? And so what happened? Sorry, I was distracted. Indy's talking right now. I'm trying to record. Indy, please. Thank you. So June 7th of 1944, a French cavalry officer, he's dressed in a uniform, in uniform. He opens the stable of General Flamm stallions. This is the General Flamm that has 10,000 Nazi troops, right? So they open the stable doors, and he rides a mare that's in season. So basically, this is a female horse that's in heat, for people that don't know. But he rides them past the open stables of the General Stallions and runs them past this mare, past the cable block. So what happens is all the horses decide to run out and chase after this mare. So it's known sort of as, it was, even though it was unofficial, it was known kind of as the last cavalry charge of World War II. Because, and I think it's hilarious because, again, these guys had this idea that's like, well, you've got all these stallions, these male horses. Let's run a mare past them after we open up the gates, right? So June 13th, this is about a week later, 1944, 150 of the Maquis hold off 1,500 of the Wehrmacht troops. Now, the Wehrmacht, for those that don't know it, that's the German army. And the German army was so efficient at killing and so efficient at doing what they did when it came to waging war that they were nearly unstoppable for quite a long time. You had 150 Maquis, outnumbered 10-1. They held off 1,500 troops, while the Allies dropped supplies, including medical supplies, machine guns, and ammunitions to them. Now, June 15th, 2 days later, the Germans return and gain control of the pass with 3,000 troops, mortars, and heavy machine guns. July 3rd, 1944, this is when they declared the Free Republic of Vercors. And it became the first democratic territory in France since the 1940 German occupation. And it looks like, I'll have to put up a picture, it looks like the tricolor, the blue, the white, and the red flag of the French. And then it's got sort of an arrow pointing down, and it's got what looks like two crosses above it. And that's the flag of the Free Republic of Vercors, and I'll have to show you that. They had a sign on there, and they painted a sign, and it said, "This is where the land of freedom begins." And again, please understand, these are people who were betrayed by their own government years before. This is now going 4 years into the occupation. And these people have been living basically up in the mountains and in caves and things like that. And they come down to help liberate part of France. And this is an amazing story. And I'd never heard this before about 11 or 12 years ago. Now, the Maquis, they built an airstrip in Vassio and Vercors for the Allies. They believed an Allied invasion of North Africa was going to be imminent. And so from there, it would be, okay, let's build an airstrip. July 19th comes, 1944. Nearly 20,000 German troops attacked the Vercors. They're supported by bombers and fighters. Now, mind you, this is a few hundred people. At the most, the Maquis numbered about 600. Imagine 20,000 troops coming at you, right? A contingent of Mongol troops also fought alongside the German forces, thinking that their land was going to be free of communist rule. These were from the Soviet Union, right? The Mongol troops. They thought, hey, if we help the Germans, we'll be liberated. We'll have our land too. So the Maquis, they send requests for aid to Charles de Gaulle for the reinforcements they were promised from the Allies. Anybody knows the tale of the Spartans, you know where this is going, right? July 21st, 1944. A force of heavy planes spotted from the direction of North Africa. Now remember, they said they believed that an invasion of North Africa was imminent. They're coming. The Allies are coming. They're invading North Africa, but they're going to come here and help us. So they see these planes coming from the direction of North Africa. The Maquis believed them to be the promised reinforcements. They had requested help from London. They requested aid, the London-based Free French, for heavier arms to counter the German arms, but none came. Air support was promised from Algiers, right? Northern Africa. None came. The German ground troops attacked the town of Saint Nazaire. They captured 40 wounded Maquisards and destroyed 93 homes. General Flom commanded his 157th Reserve Mountain Infantry Division, which included 2 artillery, 2 infantry, and 4 mountain light infantry, 1 infantry battalion from the 9th Panzer Division, which totaled over 10,000 troops. The Maquis, they waited for their salvation from the sky, and instead from the heavens came death and just rained it down on them. When the gliders arrived, the Maquisards, now imagine you're here. Imagine you're here in the middle of this, and you've been in the mountains for a few years. You've been going down, you've been doing guerrilla raids. You're helping to stop the Germans from invading or from getting to Normandy, right? From getting there. You're helping our troops that are landing on D-Day, Operation Overlord, right? When we land on the beaches in Normandy. We stormed those beaches, and those men went through hell also. But imagine you're the French resistance, and you're holding the tanks back. You're keeping the Germans, you're basically slowing them down so that our forces that are landing have more of a chance. And you look up, and it looks like they're here. And it's a bunch of German gliders instead with SS troops. When the gliders arrived, the Maquis shouted, the Yanks, right? No, it was the Germans. It was the Germans instead. They saw gliders with these black iron crosses, right? I guess not iron, but the black crosses on the gliders as they came down. Bear in mind, these are SS. This is a Schutzstaffel. These are pretty much like the German equivalent of the special forces. These were not just regular army either. This is the SS. These were Himmler's guys. July 21st, 1944. Captain Bernet, he sent a telegraph to London that reads this. He was the head of the Maquis de Vercors. He was one of the leaders. And he said, are attacked by paratroopers. We defend. Adieu. The next day, July 22nd, and the following, the 23rd, in response to the uprising of the Maquis du Vercors and slowing them down and preventing them from getting access to the beaches at Normandy that quickly, the German paratroopers and approximately 20 gliders containing 500 SS soldiers emerged on the plateau. The villages of Vassaux and Chapelle and Vercors, they were completely burned and destroyed. Innocents were shot in churches. They were shot in the chapels. They just gunned them down. The SS troops killed men and women. They killed children. They killed farm animals. They killed domestic pets. They killed everything. Everything that was there, they killed. They murdered. And throughout the Vercors, throughout this whole region, they put the dead on display. This is a hard one for me to get through because it's different when you talk about battles and warfare. And I'm so far removed from these things. But I've got pictures, and in the research that I did, I collected photographs and things like that, copies of them. And there's some that I really would like to post up, especially this one where there's a gentleman facing a firing squad of at least seven Germans that are getting ready to fire on him, and he's smiling. I mean, this guy's like his shirt torn open so they can aim at his heart, and he's sitting there smiling. Now, in the other areas, in damp caves known as the Grand Goulet, a handful of the Maquis, armed with shotguns, handguns, and petrol bombs, held off the Germans with tanks for 8 hours. 8 hours. Just a handful of them held off all of these Germans. In retaliation, the Germans, they destroyed a village of La Barraque. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, so as not to dishonor the memory of those people. They destroyed that village in revenge. And they destroyed the headstones of a cemetery even with a tank. They ran over the headstones in the cemetery. These guys were brutal, right? Domestic pets, livestock, it didn't matter. It was total war for the Germans. It was complete and utter destruction. By July 24th, a few days after most of these events, the Maquis were broken and scattered, and they took to the forests and the caves. July 25th, those injured in the caves who couldn't move were smothered to death or shot by the German forces that discovered them. Those who were able to move and actually get up that were captured were thrown over the cliffs. The doctors, the nurses, and the priests, right? Nurses, doctors, these are the healers. They were taken to Lyon, where they were handed over to the butcher of Lyon, Klaus Barbie. He had the men killed and tortured first, then killed, and then tortured the women and sent them to Ravensbrück, which was the infamous women's concentration camp. And these nurses and any of the clergy that were female that were sent there, they later died or were murdered. So what are the casualties here? 639 members of the French resistance, 201 civilians, and the Free Republic of Vercors lasted less than 1 month. 1 month. Bear in mind, those civilians were from a village. These weren't combatants. These weren't people that were in the war. Over 840 people. 840 people. And the sad thing is the Allies kind of just left them. They received no aid. They were promised, but they received none. I mean, they did early on. They received aid in the form of some weapons, some medical supplies, some food. But when it really, really mattered later on when they needed it, they couldn't get it. There are other tales like this. In revenge, the Nazis also went to a place called Oradour-sur-Glane. I hope I'm pronouncing that right as well, so as not to offend the memory of those departed that were murdered in that village. But there were over 600 men, women, and children in that village that were murdered, and they were piled up. Piled up. The Germans would burn churches. They would shoot people praying in the chapel. They didn't care. There's even a note, I'll have to find the citation, but I even read that an American soldier once who was shot down in a smaller area, in this region, in a small village, found the remains of many, many people like this, and animals, buildings burned, churches burned, people shot in the churches, bodies strewn out about as a warning to anybody who would dare defy the Germans, the Nazis. And among them, this American soldier, he found a crucified infant. And let that sink in. Let that sink in. You know, when we think about civilians and we just, it's a casualty, and casualties of war, these things happen. But imagine coming across that. Imagine coming across a crucified person in general. We see it on TV, but in real life, it's got to be vastly different. But an infant, right? I mean, the Germans, this Nazi regime, they were brutal. And these poor people, they defended to the last. They didn't just run and hide and try to escape. They went back up into the mountains, but they stayed there and they fought the Germans to the last man, the last woman, and sometimes to the last of the children. And again, for the Nazis, it was total war, right? It was complete and savage, what they would call scorched earth. Like the Romans, right? You defeat your enemy and then till up the earth and salt it so nothing grows there for a generation. Well, this is what they did. But remember them, the Maquis du Vercors, the Spartans of the French resistance. Their own country betrayed them. De Gaulle didn't deliver on his promises either. And I think one of the saddest things is when I read that they saw the planes, and I'm like, oh my God, they saved him. Because I'm reading it at, in chronological order. I'm thinking, wow, these people, yeah, man, the reinforcements came. They weren't the reinforcements, but imagine waiting for reinforcements, and you know that it's them that's coming in the air, and instead of salvation, you get hell rained down on you. Man, it's a hard thing. So anyway, I wanted to get through that one. That one, it was really hard giving that. It was a PowerPoint presentation I did for a class I was taking in World War II history. And it was hard to get through. It's a little bit easier now. But at the time, and I think at the time, Maria may have been pregnant with Audrey as well. So there were all these things, or maybe she was just born. Maybe it was only 10 years ago. But since then, I've since stopped when it comes to disrespecting the French, especially during World War II. Because I think the true French, I think the people, they never, ever stopped fighting. So, all right, hopefully that worked out. And sorry, I know it's really informal and all that, but again, the Maquis du Vercors. And there's actually a memorial for them as well. So I've never been to France myself, but There is. There's a cemetery memorial of the resistance at Vassouin-Vercors. And I'll share some of these probably on my Facebook. I'll share some of the photos that I was able to find and some of the research where they show the men lined up, where they show the ones that were captured. And you can see clearly their faces. These are real people who endured a real atrocity. And imagine you're in the church praying and you don't know any better. And people come in and they just start, well, we've had it here, right? In America. A few years back, right? We've had that happen. So, but the difference is, I think in here, our government didn't turn us over to a foreign enemy and let them rule over us and conscript us into service. So there is that difference. But imagine they come to your village and they burn it down and they lock you in a church, like that scene in The Patriot, which really wasn't that accurate, but the Germans did do things like that during World War II. Hitler, again, he wasn't Catholic, he wasn't Protestant, he wanted his own cult. His own cult. I didn't say religion, his own cult. And that's not to denigrate the Catholics or the Protestants. I'm not calling them a cult. I am saying that Hitler wanted his cult. There was no room for anything else. So you guys take care. I think Maria's coming home. I'm going to go and end the stream, and I hope somebody learned something. All right. Let me know. Take care. Bye-bye.